Sir, this is a restricted area. The voice was young. It was sharp, laced with the brittle confidence of someone who had only recently earned their authority and was eager to wield it. Corporal Davis stood with his feet planted shoulder-width apart, a perfect parade rest that was anything but restful. It was a posture of confrontation, a human wall. The old man he addressed did not move. He just stood there, a frail silhouette against the manicured green of the parade deck at Marine Corps Base Quantico. His shoulders were stooped, his hands gnarled and resting atop the handle of a simple wooden cane. He wore a plain tweed jacket, far too warm for the Virginia sun, and gray trousers that had seen better decades. He looked lost. He looked like a grandfather who had taken a wrong turn on his way to the commissary. "I have an invitation," the old man said. His voice was a dry rustle, like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. Corporal Davis allowed a small, almost imperceptible smirk to touch his lips. "An invitation. Right. Sir, the commandant himself is dedicating the new training facility today. The guest list was triple-checked. You're not on it." The old man's gaze drifted past the young Marine, toward the gleaming new building of brick and glass. He seemed to be looking through it, at something far away, something long ago. At his side, clutched in his left hand, was a small, worn canvas satchel. It was stained and faded, its leather straps cracked like old river mud. Davis's eyes narrowed on the bag. It was another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. Everything here was spit and polish, regulations, and order. This bag was an anomaly, an affront. "I'm going to need to see some identification, sir," Davis said, his tone hardening. "And I'll have to inspect that bag." The old man's gaze returned from its distant journey. He looked at the corporal, his eyes a pale, washed-out blue, but with a depth that was unsettling. There was no fear in them, no anger, only a profound and weary patience. "The bag is personal," he stated simply. This was the wrong answer. For Corporal Davis, it was a challenge, a violation of the neat, orderly world he was charged with protecting. "Nothing is personal on a secure military installation, old-timer," Davis snapped, the respectful sir now gone, replaced with a casual derision. "Hand it over." From a distance of 50 yards, Gunnery Sergeant Evans watched the exchange. He was overseeing the outer perimeter of the security detail, and his eyes missed nothing. He had seen the old man arrive, shuffling from the visitor parking lot with a quiet purpose that seemed at odds with his frail appearance. Evans had been a Marine for 18 years. He knew men. He knew the look of a fighter, and he knew the look of a man who was done fighting. This old man was both. There was a stillness about him. It wasn't the stillness of age or infirmity. It was the practiced, absolute economy of motion that Evans had only ever seen in the most seasoned reconnaissance Marines. The kind of man who could sit motionless in a jungle for 3 days, waiting for a single shot. He didn't like what he was seeing from Davis. The corporal was a good Marine, squared away, a PT stud. But he was green. He saw the world in black and white, in regulations and violations. He saw a shabby old man, not the unsettling stillness that was making the hairs on Evans's own neck stand up. "What's in there, Grandpa?" Davis taunted, reaching for the satchel. "A magic wand. Your war stories." The old man's grip tightened on the bag, a flicker of something ancient and protective in his eyes. He did not relinquish it. Davis's patience broke. With a sigh of performative frustration, he snatched the bag. The strap was looped around the old man's wrist, and the sudden jerk sent the man stumbling forward a step. He caught his balance with his cane, his face remaining a placid mask. But when the corporal's fingers touched the rough canvas of the bag, the world shifted for Arthur Miller. It was not the Virginia sun on his face, but a cold, sheeting rain. It was not the smell of cut grass, but the coppery tang of blood and the acrid scent of cordite hanging heavy in the air. It was not the sound of a distant marching band practicing, but the wet, desperate gasps of a young lance corporal whose lungs were filling with fluid. The weight of the boy was a familiar memory on his back, a searing fire in his old muscles. He could feel the mud sucking at his boots, hear the whispered prayers of the mountain villagers huddled in the cave behind him. He could feel the cold, heavy object he had just been given, pressed into his palm by the village elder. A crude cross, forged from the melted-down shell casings of the enemy artillery that he had silenced. The memory vanished as quickly as it came, leaving behind an echo of profound sorrow. Corporal Davis unbuckled the satchel with clumsy, angry fingers. He upended it, spilling the contents onto the small security table beside him. There was not much inside. A worn leather wallet, a folded, yellowed newspaper clipping, a small, dog-eared book of poetry, and the cross. It was not a thing of beauty. It was dark, almost black, forged from some cheap, heavy metal. It was uneven, lumpy, with the clear marks of a hammer on its surface. It looked like something a child would make in a shop class. Davis poked it with his finger. "What is this piece of junk?" Gunnery Sergeant Evans started walking. He moved with a steady, unhurried pace that was far more intimidating than a sprint. He had seen enough. The physical contact, the dumping of the bag, the naked contempt in the corporal's voice. This was no longer a security check. It was a humiliation. "Corporal Davis," Evans said, his voice a low growl. Davis looked up, startled. He immediately snapped to a position of attention. "Gunnery Sergeant, what is the situation here?" Evans asked, his eyes fixed not on Davis, but on the old man, who was calmly gathering his spilled belongings. This individual breached the restricted perimeter, Gunny. No identification. Refused to submit to a search. "I'm handling it." "You're handling it," Evans repeated, the words flat and devoid of approval. He looked at the old man. "Sir, my apologies for the enthusiasm of my Marine. Can you tell me your name?" The old man looked up, his pale blue eyes meeting Evans's. "Miller. Arthur Miller." The name meant nothing to Evans. It was a common name, but something about the way the man said it, with a simple finality, resonated. Evans turned his attention to the crude cross on the table. It was ugly, but there was a weight to it, a sense of history that made him uneasy. "And this, Mr. Miller?" "A gift," Miller said quietly. Corporal Davis, emboldened by the presence of a superior, couldn't help himself. "A gift? Looks like you pulled it out of a scrapyard. You probably 3D printed it in your garage." "That was it." Evans turned his head slowly, leveling a gaze at Davis that could freeze fire. "Corporal, go stand over there. And shut your mouth." "But Gunny." Now, the corporal's face flushed with anger and embarrassment, but he obeyed. He stalked over to the edge of the security post, his back rigid with indignation. Evans knew he was crossing a line. Undermining a junior NCO in front of a civilian was bad form. But his gut, the gut that had kept him alive in Fallujah and San Jin, was screaming at him that something was profoundly wrong. He pulled out his radio, then thought better of it. A radio call could be overheard. This needed discretion. He pulled out his personal cell phone and walked a few paces away, keeping Miller and the table in his line of sight. He dialed a number he knew by heart. The direct line to the commandant's administrative office. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Sergeant Major's office. This is Gunnery Sergeant Evans at the main gate security detail for the dedication." "Who am I speaking to?" "This is Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole." "What do you need, Gunny?" "We're busy here." The tone was impatient. "I have a situation at the main gate, Master Guns. A civilian. Name is Arthur Miller." A pause. "Never heard of him. Is he on the list?" "Negative," Evans said. "But there's something else. He's carrying an object. It's a cross. Looks handmade, forged from, I don't know, artillery shells, maybe. Dark metal." The silence on the other end of the line was immediate. It was so sudden, so absolute, that Evans thought the call had dropped. He pulled the phone away from his ear to check the screen. It was still connected. "Master Guns," Evans said, his own voice now laced with uncertainty. "Cole, are you there?" When the voice returned, it was completely transformed. The impatience was gone, replaced by a tone of shocked, almost fearful urgency. "Gunny." Cole's voice was a strained whisper. "Listen to me very carefully. What did you say the name was?" "Miller. Arthur Miller. And the cross." "Describe it again." "It's dark, heavy-looking, crude, like it was hammered out on an anvil." Evans heard a sharp intake of breath, then the muffled sound of Cole shouting away from the phone. "Get the general. Now. Tell him it's the ghost. Tell him the shepherd's cross is here." Cole came back on the line, his voice shaking with an emotion Evans couldn't identify. It sounded like, "Oh, Gunnery Sergeant Evans. You will stand by. Your new orders are to protect that man with your life. Do not let him leave. Do not let anyone else speak to him." The Commandant of the Marine Corps is on his way to your position. I repeat, the Commandant is en route. The line went dead. Evans stood frozen for a second, the phone still pressed to his ear. The Commandant, the four-star general in charge of the entire Marine Corps, was coming to the main gate for a confused old man. He slowly lowered the phone, his mind reeling. He looked over at Arthur Miller, who was now patiently waiting, his hands once again resting on his cane. He looked at the crude cross on the table. He looked at the fuming Corporal Davis. The world had just tilted on its axis, and Gunnery Sergeant Evans was standing at the epicenter. It happened less than 2 minutes later. The sound came first, a low rumble of powerful engines, growing louder at an impossible speed. Then they appeared. A convoy of 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans, their windows tinted, government plates gleaming. They weren't using sirens, but the official flags mounted on their front fenders cleared traffic as effectively as any whale. They bypassed the main checkpoint, tires squealing as they took the turn toward the dedication site, then screeched to a halt a mere 20 feet from Evans's position. Doors flew open before the vehicles had fully stopped. Marines in sharp dress uniforms, sidearms visible, emerged and formed a crisp, disciplined perimeter. The rear passenger door of the lead vehicle opened. Out stepped General Marcus Thompson, the 38th Commandant of the United States Marine Corps. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun. His eyes, famous for their piercing intensity, were blazing with a cold fury. He ignored everyone. He ignored Gunnery Sergeant Evans, who had snapped to the most rigid salute of his life. He ignored Corporal Davis, who looked as if he had just seen a ghost and was trying to simultaneously salute and disappear into the pavement. The general strode forward with a terrifying purpose, his eyes locked on one person and one person only. He walked directly to the small, stooped man in the tweed jacket. General Thompson stopped precisely 1 foot in front of Arthur Miller. For a moment, the 4-star general and the forgotten old man just looked at each other. The fury on the general's face melted away, replaced by an expression of profound, overwhelming reverence. Then, in the stunned silence, General Thompson brought his right hand up in a salute. It was not a casual gesture. It was a movement of absolute precision, sharp and perfect, a gesture of ultimate respect from the highest-ranking Marine in the world to a civilian in a worn-out coat. His voice, a command voice that could carry across a battlefield, boomed across the parade deck, thick with emotion. "Mr. Miller," the general said, his voice cracking slightly. "It is an honor, sir." Arthur Miller simply nodded, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. He reached out a trembling hand and gently patted the general's saluting arm. "Hello, Marcus. It's been a long time." The general slowly lowered his arm, but he did not break eye contact. He then noticed the spilled contents on the table. His gaze fell upon the crude, dark metal cross. He reached out and picked it up, his large, powerful hands cradling the object as if it were the most precious artifact on earth. He turned, holding it up for the assembled, bewildered Marines to see. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, his voice now a resonant roar that commanded total attention. He didn't wait for an answer. "This," he said, his eyes sweeping over Davis, Evans, and the other security personnel, "is the Shepherd's Cross. It is one of only 2 in existence. The other one is in a vault at Langley and doesn't leave without a presidential order." He turned his gaze back to Arthur Miller, his expression softening. 70 years ago, the general began, his voice dropping into a storyteller's cadence. "In a place that isn't on any map, in a war that was never declared, a company of Marine raiders was cut off. They were surrounded, wounded, and out of ammunition. For 3 days, they were presumed lost, written off for dead." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. On the 4th day, a single man walked out of the jungle and into the forward operating base. He was not a Marine. He was a combat engineer on loan from a unit that technically didn't exist. He had been sent to build a bridge, not fight a war. But over his shoulder, he was carrying a wounded Marine. And behind him, walking in a single file line, was the entire lost company. All of them, alive. The crowd was silent, mesmerized. "This man," the general continued, his voice rising with passion, had spent 3 days and 3 nights behind enemy lines. Alone, he had hunted the hunters. He had set traps, diverted a river to flood enemy positions, and used his knowledge of demolitions to create chaos and confusion. He carried the wounded on his back, found food and water for the able, and led them through miles of impassable terrain, all while being pursued by an entire enemy battalion. He held the cross up higher. When it was over, the local villagers he had also protected took the shell casings from the enemy mortars he had silenced, and in their primitive forge, they melted them down and made him this. They called him Anagalos, the shepherd. To the enemy, he was known only as the ghost of the valley. The general finally turned his full attention, his face once again a mask of cold fury, directly onto the pale, trembling Corporal Davis. This man, this old-timer you chose to disrespect, is Arthur Miller. He refused the Medal of Honor. He refused every medal. He refused a commission. He said he was just a builder who was in the wrong place at the right time. He asked for only one thing, that his name be kept out of the official records, so he could go home and live a quiet life. The general took a step toward Corporal Davis, who looked as if he might faint. The commandant's voice dropped to a quiet, lethal register, more terrifying than any shout. You stand here in a uniform that you did not pioneer. You wear the eagle, globe, and anchor that men like him bled for. You enjoy the freedom that he bought for you with his own quiet, unacknowledged courage. Another step, and you saw weakness. You saw age. You saw a shabby coat. You failed to see the giant upon whose shoulders you stand. You are a disgrace not because you followed procedure, but because you did so without a shred of humility, without a whisper of respect. You mistook a lion for a lamb. Corporal Davis's face was ashen. Tears welled in his eyes. General, I didn't know. That, the general hissed, is the entire point. You are not paid to know. You are paid to respect. Suddenly, a frail hand rested on the general's tense forearm. Marcus, Arthur Miller said softly. The boy was doing his job. A little too much vinegar, maybe, but he's a Marine. That's what you teach them, isn't it? General Thompson looked from Miller's gentle face to Davis's broken one. He took a deep, steadying breath, his fury receding, replaced by a cold resolve. You are right, Mr. Miller. As always, he turned back to Davis. Your career is not over, Corporal, but your education is about to begin. He turned to Gunnery Sergeant Evans. Gunny. Yes, General. Evans barked. Effective immediately, you will develop a new course for all base security personnel. It will be a mandatory, monthly training. It will cover the history of this corps, focusing on the quiet heroes, the legends who never sought the spotlight. You will teach these young Marines to see beyond the uniform, to understand the meaning of humility and respect. We will call it the Miller Protocol, and Corporal Davis and his fire team will be your first students. Their first assignment will be to read every declassified document pertaining to the ghost of the valley. He looked back at Davis. You will learn that greatness does not always come with a gleaming uniform or a chest full of medals. Sometimes, it comes in a tweed jacket, carrying a canvas bag. The general then turned back to Arthur Miller, his entire demeanor changing once more. He offered his arm. Sir, he said gently, I believe your seat is in the front row. We wouldn't have started without you. Months passed. Corporal Davis was a changed man. He went about his duties with a new quietness, a new gravity. He and his team had been the first graduates of the Miller Protocol, a grueling course that was less about tactics and more about history, empathy, and the soul of the Marine Corps. Davis had read the reports. He had read the eyewitness accounts of what Arthur Miller had done, the quiet genius, the impossible bravery. He had been humbled to his very core. One rainy Tuesday, he was in the base library, studying for a promotion board. He looked up and saw Arthur Miller sitting in a worn armchair by the window, reading a book of poetry. Davis's heart hammered in his chest. He took a breath, stood up, and walked over. He stood before the old man, waiting to be acknowledged. Miller eventually looked up, his pale blue eyes holding a familiar calm. Corporal, he said, his voice a quiet rustle. Davis swallowed hard. Sir, he began, his voice thick. I never properly apologized. For my conduct. For my ignorance. There's no excuse. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. I am truly sorry. Arthur Miller looked at the young Marine for a long moment. He saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. He closed his book, marking his page with a finger. "Sit down, son," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Davis sat, perched on the edge of the seat like a nervous recruit. "There is nothing to forgive," Miller said. "You learned a lesson. A hard one, but an important one. The heaviest things a man carries are not in his pack. They're in his heart. Pride, ignorance, regret. It sounds like you've managed to lighten your load." He offered a small, knowing smile. "That's good. A Marine should travel light." With those words, a weight Corporal Davis hadn't even realized he was still carrying finally lifted. The lesson was complete. The circle was closed. The old hero had given one final, quiet gift to the young man who had learned to see.